Hey, hi, hello, welcome to episode 90 of Trail Society, produced by Free Trail, brought to you by our friends over at The Feed. I'm Corinne Malcolm.
I'm Keely Henninger.
And I'm Hillary Allen.
Okay, Keely, you have finals the week after this is recorded. You are approaching the end of your first official kind of quote unquote semester of medical school. How are you feeling about that?
Well, it's my second official semester of medical
You
school,
guys have
but
too many semesters.
yeah, my first one was 8 weeks and this one is 6 weeks. So they just kind of randomly choose, or no, the first one was 10 weeks, this one's 6 weeks. They kind of just randomly choose how long they are. So,
Nice.
whatever flavor you're gonna get, not sure.
It's like, I think
Um,
UW is on like does like a quarters system, for example, versus like a semester or trimester system. So every school's
yeah.
a little bit
Yeah, we
all over the
base it off
place.
of like the term and what the term's about. Like this one is shorter because it's just all like the immune system and blood. And so there's only really 6 weeks of content of that. Whereas in the spring, we have a 12-week block because it's all about cardiopulmonary renal. And like obviously that's a lot of stuff and you wouldn't be able to fit that in a 6 week block. So I think they kind of change them and just make them fit the block, which is kind of funny. But yeah, it's been really fun. This block's been awesome. It actually feels like you're in medical school because it's a lot more applied science instead of just, mechanisms and biochemistry and all sorts of stuff, which I also really loved. But this is definitely feels a little more like medicine, where all of our professors are MDs who talk like clinical care as well as teach us the lessons. And so it's been super fun. I was talking to Rachel Drake the other day about running, and she was like, "How's it going?" And I'm like, "Honestly, I think I've kind of reached a balance, if there is such a thing, but also I think I like running better when I have stuff going on, which we've all talked about before. But so I feel really good. I don't feel as intimidated for this round of exams as I did for the first round.
Heck yeah. And then Hilly, we call you the Hilly goat, but you've been logging a lot of flat, fast miles recently. I know we joked a little bit about you appreciating road running more than usual, but tell us a little bit about this training block that you're in. It looks really cool.
Yeah, you know what? I just needed a change. And it took me a while to kind of like find my feet again after UTMB and kind of like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I felt like I was like rushing things by putting a race too soon on the calendar. And I just wanted to just really enjoy running again. And I think I've forgotten how to run or that like I could run faster than I don't know, a 15-minute mile going up a mountain. So it's fun. It's been really fun to do it. And there's a lot of great people to train with in Boulder. And I've been having a lot of fun, I think, just like, track on Tuesdays with the girls and then, like trying to hang on for dear life at like, these reservoir loops that I'm doing with some women. So it's really fun. I'm just really enjoying it. And turns out I like it. I like road running. I'm like afraid to admit it, but I really like it. And like Keely was saying, just finding joy in like some things outside of running. I've always loved running more when I have other things going on. And turns out it's awesome when it does like miles don't take as long. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and it's fun to train for my next race, which is more runnable, which is like it's a cool challenge. I think variety is the spice of life.
Yeah, a little hint, hint, wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah, I was like, oh, which race
Hillary
is
and I are
this?
are taking a long travel to go do our next races, and it is a flatter, faster race.
Any guesses? I haven't
Hmm.
announced it officially yet.
Are you
Not that
guys
there's
not allowed? You're
anything to
not gonna
announce.
launch it on the
No.
pod?
Do we want to do an exclusive launch? I don't know. I need to make sure I'm on the registration list before I do anything. So,
I mean, I have an inkling if it's 100K, but I won't say anything.
okay.
There is a 100K option, let's put it that way. Okay, okay, enough of that. You guys can slide into your DMs with where you think Hillary and I are setting sail to in the coming months, but it will involve us both trying to get faster, which is always a fun challenge. Before we dive into some news, we're keeping things a little bit tight today because we've got a really cool interview for you. But before we do that, we need to give a big, huge, amazing shout out to our title sponsor. That is the folks over at The Feed. It's been a joy working with them. They've been filling our pantries and our school lockers and our center consoles in our car this whole year with all the snacks that one could need. I am out of waffles. I think Steven ate the last one this morning, so I'm going to need to place another order so that I do not perish in the early morning run system. And if you would like to try some snacks from the feed, the one-stop shop for all your sports nutrition needs, you're going to go over to www.thefeed.com/Trail Society, and there you're going to get a $20 credit every quarter. So $80 over the course of the year. What have you all been snacking on?
Oh man, I think the last time I was talking about electrolytes, but and honestly, it's harder too because I'm admittedly not as great at fueling when in the cold. Like I feel like I don't feel as thirsty, and then like I almost like forget to eat. But it's actually really important, obviously, to practice that. Um, no matter what. So honestly, I've been like trying to like have especially for runs that are around like 90 minutes to 2 hours, like really making sure I fuel well before I run. And so I've been kind of I've definitely been on the oatmeal train. Just trying like different things that they offer there. Like the Kodiak is great. They also have like the stoked oats there too. And then but then like during it that I want more simple things. I've just been trying like Victus is a great just easy to go down gel. But yeah, I think normally I train with more solid fuel when I'm training, but this time I'm kind of doing the opposite.
Yeah, you're running too fast. You got to have the easy things this time around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was running a workout with Peter Bromka the other day, and we would stop at our cars and get a little water and snack, and I was still eating gummies. He's like, "What are you doing? Like, you're running 6-minute pace and eating gummies. Like, chill." Like, I can't help it. The gels are just not sitting with me right now. But it's way
Yeah.
you need to get like a mixed drink.
Mm.
But I feel that pain. It's like in the cold too, it's hard to carry like food. So I've been doing a ton of like Roctane, which you can get on feed. But mostly I've been doing bars as well because I feel like in between classes, if I have to run from school, I can't start my run hangry after studying and being in class for like 7 hours. So I need all the motivation I can get. So if I have like a bar before and maybe like even a bar after, it's like really motivating to me. So I got kind of a smorgasbord. I tried Kate's Real Food. I don't know if you guys have had those, but they are bomb. There's one that's a snickerdoodle flavor, and I'm all about the Christmas themed kind of things. And so I've been really digging that. And then my go-to protein bar is like a Bonk Breaker protein bar. They have like a salted caramel peanut butter. Highly recommend.
Ooh, I love it.
So
I'm adding it to my list. I love it. I love it.
Me
I love it.
too.
Okay, so if any of that sounds good to you, or maybe none of it sounds good and you want to go explore the other options, again, you're going to go over to www.thefeed.com/Trail Society, hit that subscribe or whatever it is, but get the $20. Like get the $20, use it to buy some new snacks. And if you are listening to us while you're running right now, maybe it's time to have that first snack of your run, a little nibble on something, a little sip sip. Okay, we've got some news. And actually, the first bit of news is me recruiting you all to be part of a study that friends over at the Liverpool Johns Moores University, I think I added extra S's in there, over in the UK, they're conducting a study, just an exploration of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug or NSAIDs, think ibuprofen, that kind of thing, use in ultra runners. A friend of mine who I've interviewed before, Jamie Pugh, reached out. He's done research at Western States. He's like the GI distress
mhm.
wizard, which is probably what he doesn't want to be known for. But he's done a lot of research in that space, research on probiotics. He is brilliant. And he said, "Hey, will you do this study for me? And will you share it with all your friends?" So I'm here sharing it with all my friends, being you guys. We'll put a link in the show notes. It's super simple. It took me, I think, like maybe 5 minutes to fill out the survey. They might do a follow-up with you, if you are so inclined. But basically, they're exploring both our relationship and our use of NSAIDs, during training, during competition, and during recovery. And essentially, their whole thing is there's currently little information about NSAID use in ultra running. So we wish to gain new insights that may in future lead to development of new or alternative options to NSAIDs for ultra runners, given that there is a little bit of a kidney concern when it comes to utilizing this type of medication. So
Mhm.
we'll drop the link in our show notes, but you should go fill out that survey for them because the more of us that fill it out, the more data that they will have to look at, and then they will get to ask more questions when they realize there's always more questions to ask. So go do that. Maybe even pause the podcast right now, go to the show notes, click the link, fill out the survey, and then come back and continue listening. That might be the best option. Okay. Keely, you dropped in an interesting little bit a little nerdy science corner like tidbit for us. Can you break down what you put in here?
Yeah. So there's a new study that got on my radar the other day coming out of Spain. It was published in September, but it looked into delaying post-exercise carbohydrate intake and how that impaired next day exercise capacity. And basically, what does that mean? They took 9 males and they had them record what they had for dinner, what they had for breakfast, and then they came into the lab. They did a submax test to failure. So they were running really fast for reps, and then they basically got to a point where they couldn't go anymore. And then they either got carbohydrates for the next 3 hours after the workout, or they got no carbohydrates. They just got water. So there was like a placebo group and a non-placebo group that got carbohydrates. The goal of the study was to see if those who consumed carbohydrates within that 3 hour period after this hard workout had any impact on their ability to like recover or to do the workout in the preceding day. And we've all talked about this on here before because we've talked through different dietary recommendations from sports dietitians who've told us, that hour window after working out is really crucial to kind of ingest carbohydrates and protein for muscle recovery. So this study in particular was just looking at carbohydrates, and they found that there was a reduction in their next day capacity for that workout. So those who didn't have that carbohydrate mix, the 3 hours after the day prior's workout, did not make it as far in that next day's run to capacity. Basically, they tapped out sooner. They also had increased perceived effort. So that kind of makes sense. And I think this is important, obviously, for those who, I don't know, have crazy lives and do workouts early in the morning and then maybe have to run out the door, chasing children, running to work, doing all these things, and they don't have time to grab a snack. Like their ability to work out that next day might not only feel harder, but also be harder. And so trying to really prioritize that post exercise consumption of a really proper breakfast or snack is just really important. Obviously, this study has some limitations. First and foremost, being it was all males, and there was only 8 of them, which was not too many, but enough to actually show some statistical significance. And then they also didn't control for what they had for dinner or breakfast before the study. They just recorded the calories. And so, I mean, there was a variance of about 100 calories per meal across the subjects, across breakfast and dinner. So it was around 300 calories of difference a day, which again is not a ton, but if that was all, the same person in each group where it was like there was lots of trends, that could just kind of skew the data. Also, type of carbohydrates might also have an impact on that performance. And so the authors kind of admitted that they could do that differently next time, where they're actually like controlling the kinds of carbohydrates and amount of carbohydrates they're having in those pre-exercise meals as well. But I think just more fuel to the fire of fueling and getting people more on the fueling train, especially before, but also now really after that workout, so that you're not impairing your training for the next day.
Did they do a washout where it's like all 8 or 9 males made it through one and then they made it through the other? Or was it like they divided this group of 8 or 9 people in
No,
half and
they
then
did. No, they all did. Yeah, they did a washout.
perfect.
Yep.
Sweet.
Mhm.
Yeah, so they all had to do this test with carbohydrates and then the same version of the test without carbohydrates, and there was a
Mhm.
decline in the without group. So that's like
Mhm.
an important thing, particularly when you're working with this small of a sample size, which again is a very small sample size,
Mhm.
which is very common in this type of study.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Exercise physiology is a wild field in that regard because you're like, can you find significance? What is significant? You've got to define all of that, and the power number or how many subjects you need becomes very, very critical. You like one person drop out, and you're like, cool, we can't
Like,
say anything now. So
yeah.
very important, but a cool study, and yeah, as you mentioned, a good reminder to like fuel like whatever that hack is, right? Like, and it can feel like a hack, but like having that recovery drink in the car, or I think it
Mhm.
was Hillary who mentioned last time, like really liking the scratch apple cider flavor and having that in like a warm thermos in the car that you're sipping on
Mhm.
Mhm.
post run. Like that is
Mhm.
a great way to get in some of those carbs if you're not going to get carbs and protein in with
Right.
like a recovery beverage. That's a great way to get some of those carbs in immediately post exercise
Mhm.
to rebuild that muscle glycogen and hopefully keep you
Oh yeah.
happy. Mostly keep you
Yeah.
happy. Okay. And then I went a little bit crazy because there's two pieces of research that came out in like the last like 10 days that are both like super exciting about women's sports and also devastating about women's sports.
Mm.
So we're gonna start with the good news, and then we'll transition to the bad news, but it'll also tee up our interview, which I think is really cool. So the first one is that there's this group called The Collective, which is like the women's sports arm of Wasserman. And I say the S is like their Z's. I don't know if that's correct. But essentially they focus primarily on women's sports. And they just did a huge study and survey, kind of looking at how investments in women's professional sports in particular, so looking at like the WNBA, the Women's Professional Soccer League, and the Women's Professional Hockey League, looking at those three leagues as examples, for expansion, for investment, for media rights, for collective bargaining agreements, and also recognizing that women's sports and women's sports leagues require a different type of evaluation when it comes to evaluating like worth and growth and cost because they're operated differently than men's sports. But the big takeaway is that they found that more investors are putting their money into women's sports, and it could literally unlock billions of dollars, not millions, billions of dollars. And it's like, well, duh, we've been screaming about this for a long time now. And actually, they just came out with the list of like the top 10 best paid athletes for women in 2024, whatever year this is. And they're like mostly tennis players and like Simone Biles. And I was like, man, Hillary was the only one that was like in the right sport for a second. But
For a second, not
I
anymore.
digress. I digress. Okay, so one of the quotes that kind of stood out from this, and then there's some like really key facts that I'm going to kind of rattle off here and we can discuss if we want. But one of the key quotes said team valuations for the National Women's Soccer League jumped by 57% in the past year, alongside some eye-popping purchases and investments. And the first valuation report of the Women's National Basketball Association found its teams worth a collective 1.16 billion. And this was per the industry platform Sportico. Investors are paying record sums for new teams in the two leagues, although announced expansion has been deliberate and is slowing down, which may put fresh entry fees even higher. I think we've got like Cleveland is making a bid for the 16th WNBA team. They want a team back in Cleveland. We've seen, I think, 3 new teams get added to the WNBA in basically the last like 12 to 18 month period coming into this new season. The soccer league is in a similar growth pattern, as well as kind of like an initial growth, some small growth, and then kind of like holding steady. But some really cool things from the study included basically that fans of women's sports are like not passive and they are much more engaged. And so the data that they pulled were fans of women's sports are 18% more likely to be younger, just like that's a younger demographic. And 67% of them are more likely to earn a higher, like to have higher household incomes. So it's a younger, engaged, non-passive audience that has a higher mean house income as opposed to like maybe like the fans of the NFL broadly, for example. They also went on to say, and that was like kind of in contrast to men's sports in similar leagues. And then in 2019, women's sports only represented less than 6% of sports media coverage across broadcast, streaming, social media, and digital publications. But by 2025, that is like in, less than a month, women's sports will represent 20% of all media coverage. So we got a long ways to go, but it is going, and it is going in the right direction. Another like thing that I pulled from it were that fans of women's sports are 54% more aware of the brands that sponsor women's sports and 45% more likely to consider purchasing from those brands. Thus, jersey and kit patch sponsorships are high value assets for both teams from a revenue perspective and for sponsors, like in a return on investment there. And I think that our interviewee today has some similar information when it comes to women being better brand ambassadors, brand representatives than their male counterparts. We're trustworthy. You trust our opinions. This is good. We like this. It's good. Women's sports is not just, good for business. It's good business. And then, okay, I pulled 2 more things. The next one is professional women's sports teams are almost twice, 1.7 times as likely or more likely to include celebrity owners than professional men's teams.
Mm.
And we've seen that, like these tennis players that are raking in $14 to $22 million a year. They are some of the people that are investing in women's sports teams, including, and there are also male athletes investing in women's sports teams as well. Celebrity investors, and more specifically, celebrity athletes, can provide tremendous impact with even a minimal investment. Teams with celebrity athletes as stakeholders gain unique perspective, operational expertise, and credibility while unlocking new audiences through high fan engagement. And they went on to say things like the ownership structure of women's professional teams is much different than what we traditionally see in the men's professional sports leagues, and it's an advantage for the women's professional teams to have this different kind of ownership structure with these like interesting investors in the mix. And the last
Right.
thing, and then I'll shut up on this because I'm preaching to the choir. And it's mentioned in Deloitte, and Deloitte is, they kind of are the know-it-alls when it comes to market projections. So Deloitte revised its own forecasts for women's sports, predicting annual global revenue this year will exceed 1 billion for the first time, with about half of that coming from the US. That's at least 300% higher than Deloitte's previous valuation just 3 years ago. The research noted that greater investment can lead to a virtuous cycle by leading to better teams and a better product, which may make the franchises more valuable. So, women's sports, baby. We're here to sing about it.
Yeah, this is all interesting. I mean, I can't like the last thing you said about like basically ex-professional athletes then coming back in and investing. So like
Or even
it's
current
like the
professional athletes. It's like current
well,
professional tennis players are investing in women's
right.
professional soccer.
But this is my
Mm.
point, is like the duality in women's sports is like, is it necessary because they're not getting paid that they need to have another job?
Hmm.
Or it's like then reinvesting in it. It's like continuing that cycle. I don't know. It's just interesting. Maybe we'll talk about it with,
With Leila.
the
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's one of those things where it's like it's not just good for business, it's good business. And so I think some of
Hmm.
these professional athletes that are investing in other women's professional sports aren't necessarily doing it because they're like, I need a side
Yeah.
hustle. I love that my side hustle is like a women's professional like soccer team. That's great.
Right.
But I do think it's a way to diversify their investment portfolio, and why not have it be in this like, this amazing
Hmm.
professional women's team. So I think that
Hmm.
is super interesting.
Right, yeah. And I feel like some of those women are probably like some of the top paid athletes in the world that are taking some of those earnings and investing them. But
Yeah.
I do agree. It's like we're women, we're paying ourselves. Like we're kind of helping it pull it along,
Yeah.
which is kind of cool, which is awesome to kind of see other professional women support other professional women. Because I think for a while it was still like a dog eat dog world. Even if it wasn't the same sport, I think it was still like there weren't that many sponsorship dollars. So we didn't want other women to rise up because that would take some of our pie. And now we're like, oh, there's lots of pie. So let's try to like, raise everybody up because we can all have a piece of this, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, like if you
Hmm.
succeed, I succeed. And I like that being our game plan, as opposed to like, if I succeed, you can't succeed. There isn't
Right.
room for you in this sport.
Hmm.
So, or in the sporting space, the sponsorship dollar space. So I
Yeah.
really appreciated that.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see how the numbers change over the next year or two with viewership and stuff as we're pumping more money in and we're getting more dedicated airtime because that will start telling an even better story, which will draw in even more money and then just keep self-perpetuating in a
Yeah,
positive
and
way.
there's been more growth opportunities from a like a media agreement standpoint, because women's sports media contracts have existed on shorter cycles, shorter time courses. And
Hmm.
so they come up every like 3 years for negotiation, for example, as opposed to like men's sporting deals that it can be locked in a lot longer. And so I think that has helped, that has allowed that market to not stagnate. And so it's been like, oh, there's an increased investment, like we need to increase our investment. And so that has been, I think, overwhelmingly
Hmm.
positive. It's been maybe a happy accident that those agreements have worked that way, but all of the leagues are benefiting from it. And I think that, hopefully we see a steady rise. Some of the projections went through 2027, and they're projecting a steady rise through that lens of their projection, which I'm sure might even change dramatically between now and 2027. But the other side of the coin. So I said I had good news and I had bad news. And the bad news is also getting a lot of media. But our interview guest today is going to help us strike a balance between the good news and the bad news bears here. But essentially, this is both some news and a little introduction here, but a new piece of research dropped literally like 48 hours before we're recording, from a group called Parity. We're going to talk more about that organization today. But it was a big survey that interviewed 500 professional athletes. They have a huge net of vetted athletes within their brand management kind of ecosystem. And so some of those athletes came from there, and then some came from other kind of trusted sources. So they were verified, kind of the level of professionalism here. They're representing their country. They play rugby, they play American football, they play soccer, they're track and field athletes, they're weightlifters, etc. Like it really spans the gamut. And I think there was like 30 countries represented. I'm pulling this off the top of my head now, but as Hillary and I talked about before we hit record, is that no one sport made up more than 12% of the sport type. So there's good variety there. And then it was, I think a little bit more than half of the respondents were from North America. So that's the other thing to kind of like remember here, is that there is a little bit of that bias. But the bad news kind of stats was that the results from this study are in stark contrast to what's happening in the WNBA, the National Women's Soccer League, and the Women's Professional Hockey League. And that is, things are not looking good for a lot of women's professional athletes. And just kind of some high level eye-catching numbers from it were things like 50% of the athletes reported a negative or zero net income from their sport. So they were spending as much or more on their sport than what they were making. 74% of the athletes reported working at least one other job. Some of that was seasonal, some of that was full-time, some of that was contract work. There was a wide variety, but 74% of the athletes had another job. 64% of the athletes considered retiring in 2023 due to the expense of being an athlete. 58% of those in this study made less than 25K in 2023 from their sport, and endorsements were actually even lower. So they classify endorsements and sponsorship, which is like really how trail runners make all of their money, right? Because we don't have prize money. So most of the women actually in this study were making money from like prize earnings, because like more than 50% of them were making less than 5K from endorsements every year or something. So I really want to dig into that number in our interview today as well, because that is where trail is in a very different boat as far as how we make our money. And then 88% of the survey respondents said that a 20K sponsorship would be incredibly meaningful to life changing, which is like, it's not a lot of money for many brands, but it would make a massive difference to these athletes when it comes to viability of staying in their sport and it being financially sustainable. So I guess that's a lot of numbers. I'm wondering how you both feel about that in contrast to the projections from the collective on professional women's sports leagues.
Well, I think both truths are kind of going hand in hand, because I think we're seeing in the first piece how fast women's sports growing, but then in the second piece, we're seeing that that's not translated to the athletes yet, right? So there's still a ton of athletes who are not making a ton of money from the sport, but the sport is slowly growing, and so eventually that money will make it into the hands of the athletes. But yeah, this doesn't shock me at all, because I think too, when we think about something like the National Women's Soccer League or the WNBA, I'm sure that 40% of those athletes would also answer these questions very similarly to these answers, right? And I don't think everyone in those leagues are making enough money to only play one sport
Not
either.
everyone's Caitlin Clark.
Right. Right.
She came in number 10,
Or a
I
lot of
think,
the
on the
other
top
really good
10 most
athletes.
paid. Yeah.
Right. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think it's just like there's some women in sports making a ton of money. There's some
A very
women making
small
a good
percent.
amount of money, and then there's a lot who are not making much money across all of the sports. And
This is
so,
why like women's professional cycling is made up of like investment bankers and
yeah,
PhDs and doctors.
totally. I think it's interesting though that like the prize earnings make up most of the money. I think to your point, Corinne, it is very different than our sport, because I'd say a lot of our big races don't pay a lot. My one question is, if your sponsor matches a prize purse or pays you for a race, does that count as an endorsement, or does that count as a prize earning? Because like a lot of sponsors in our sport at least will pay you a lot for winning or doing really well at a race, but I don't know if that counts as prize earnings or an endorsement, because it's not coming from the race.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's some more details to dive into, and that is a great segue to our interview today. We're really excited to have Leela Srinivasan and she's going to correct me on how she says her name here in just a moment. But she's the CEO of the company I mentioned, Parity. She's a mom of three. She's a runner and she's a karaoke enthusiast. And then more about Parity. Parity is this really cool sports marketing and sponsorship platform, which is focused squarely on professional women's sports and professional female athletes. It was minority founded in 2020, and its mission is to close the gender income and opportunity gap in professional sports. They do this through high impact campaigns and collaborations between brands, women, athletes, and their fans. And they're currently working with over 1,000 athletes across 80 sports, and that's everything from archery to weightlifting and everything in between, the whole alphabet of sports. So I'm going to get out of the way and we're going to dive right into this interview.
Hi, my name's Leela Srinivasan. I am the CEO of Parity, which is a sports sponsorship platform focused exclusively on professional women athletes. I'm about 18 months into my journey in sports marketing and women's sports. Before that, I did a ton of stuff in marketing, consulting, sales, other things. I'm super excited to be on this podcast because I love running. I'm not fast, but I love running.
I was going to say, before we dive into your work with Parity, we are a running podcast after all. And so we'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationship with sport and running. Did you grow up playing sports?
I did, yeah. I grew up in Scotland, which is not known for its sporting prowess, other than maybe Andy Murray. But I grew up in a family where we watched every sport under the sun, you name it. Sports was always on the TV. Of course, back in the 80s, that meant I saw women at the Olympics and Wimbledon, and that was it. But I didn't think about that at the time. My playing career was I played high school field hockey and tennis. I wasn't good enough to play college, nor was there really much of a college system in Scotland. So I didn't think about playing beyond that. Sort of play tennis recreationally. I think the thing that I did start doing probably at college and then have continued to do to this day is run. It's not super consistent. I go through periods of running more, running less. I've run 4 marathons in my life. Again, not quickly, but I find running to be the way I just alleviate stress, frankly. It's a way I process my thinking. It's now how I listen to podcasts. I feel the endorphins flowing. It gives me a lot, I'd say. So it remains a favorite activity of mine.
One of us, a podcast listener on the run. That's where I listen. That's where I catch up on all my podcasts as well. I've got one follow-up question, Hilly, before you jump in. And we just recorded yesterday the episode that came out today. And we kind of answered this question all together about if we could play any other sport now at a high level. And I'm not quite asking you to pick your favorite child, right? But because I know you interact with athletes from all walks of life, all different sporting types. If you could be really good and play at a high level in one of those sports, what would it be?
It's a tough question to answer because we look across all sports, I would say. But if I think back to my childhood and opportunities I didn't have, the key one was to play soccer or football, as it was known then. Now you have to understand, again, I grew up in Scotland. Football is the national sport, basically. I grew up on the terraces of Dundee Football Club, going with my mum to home games every other week, basically. They were dismal. Sometimes they were relegated, sometimes they were mediocre, but they were never great, I would say. I grew up on the football terraces as a teenager, and I played in the playground, between the ages of, I don't know, probably 8 and 13 or something like that. Girls didn't play soccer when I was growing up. It wasn't a sport for girls in the UK, certainly. And also the school I went to, nobody played soccer, team soccer. They played, the boys played rugby, the girls played field hockey, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't an option that was open to me, but I've always loved soccer. I still to this day follow various soccer teams, and I just never had that opportunity, but I had such a passion for the game and still do.
Yeah. Hillary, what do you got?
Well, no, just we have a lot in common. My father grew up in Isle of Skye, and it's interesting to play
Wait, sorry. Your dad grew up on the Isle of Skye?
Yeah, he did.
I have literally never met anybody whose parent grew up on the Isle of Skye. That is wild and
Yeah, it's
amazing.
amazing. I've been there a couple times. Saw his childhood home. He was actually born in North Wales, and then his mother is Scottish, and how they have a house up there. And so just knowing how, I mean, it's like northern Scotland, the weather's pretty horrible, but I mean, it's funny because you can run. I mean, even if it's rainy and windy, you can at least still run. But yeah, playing, I'd imagine even just growing up in a place like Scotland, like access to, sports that would require a little bit of like, infrastructure to play would be a little bit more difficult. But yeah, it's
Certainly in Skye, that is
yeah.
true. I mean, I was down in the Lowlands near St
Okay.
Andrews, so
Yeah.
we'd be on the bus every Saturday morning to go play hockey in
Yeah.
sub-zero temperature somewhere. But yeah, it's
Yeah, and I think it's interesting just too because of the just differences in I think in Europe, right? Like well, football and is just it's very popular, and even tennis because I also played tennis. So if I had to, we this the other day, if I had to be a proficient or professional in another sport, I would choose tennis because it's absolutely amazing. But yeah, some cool parallels here.
I love it.
yeah.
Yeah, I've been researching a lot about like how do we get women more active
Mhm.
as we're older in particular, and high school athletics actually is like one of the biggest predictors of doing sports and being active as an adult, and
Mhm.
that doesn't exist in a lot of places. It's like Canada, the US, New Zealand, parts of the UK, and parts of Japan, but it's not normal. So that's a topic maybe for another day, but it has been top of mind. So yeah, hearing how different folks have grown up and then recognizing that, yeah, I'm on an uphill battle of convincing 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds that they are an athlete when they didn't identify that way as a kid.
Right. But I think this does play into exactly like what we're going to get into. It's if we're looking at, women's sports, professional sports, it's if there's less women participating in it, if they start to dropping off in middle school and high school and then they don't have a place to do this in university, then how do you actually get more women's sports? And then the consequence of that is to pay them equally as well. So I think it's all related, but
It's all connected. So I guess diving into that, um, people have likely, if they follow women's sports, have likely seen Parity's name on social media, covered in different news media outlets recently because you released a bit of research just a couple weeks ago that was super fascinating, a little bit sad, but also inspirational to maybe where things are going. So backing up from that, because we'll dive into the research here in a little bit later, but what is Parity and what is the organization's role when it comes to women's sports?
Parity's been around for about 4 years now. I joined as CEO about a year and a half ago. And our mission is to close the gender income and opportunity gap in professional sports. The way we do that is we've over time built a community of over 1,100 professional women athletes. This is a glorious cross section of sporting humanity, if you will. We have athletes that play over 80 sports. They represent all 50 states and 30 countries. The thing they have in common is they are elite in their sport. And we, with that community, we get to know them. We ask a lot of questions up front when they join. From there, we're out every day of the week talking to brands, pitching them on all the opportunity that we see for brands to invest in women's sports. And, I say this hand on heart as a former three-time CMO, there's so much opportunity for marketers and marketing organizations to lean into women's sports these days. So we make that case for women's sports as a whole. Assuming that message breaks through, then we sit down with the brand and understand, okay, what are their goals? Who are their target audiences? What products and services are top of mind for them? What are their values? And from there, we work out, well, which athletes or, which athlete or set of athletes might be incredible partners for them through ambassador work, through speaking engagements, through just different ways that brands can activate with in partnership with athletes to reach their audiences.
I was reflecting that this like sounds like the absolute dream job. And I'm curious to hear, because you just came in 18 months ago, like why you were excited about coming in to Parity, taking the reins there, and just working in this sector in general. Because you've obviously worked high up as a CMO, but not necessarily directly in the sports world like this and the women's sports world in particular.
Yeah. So on reflection, 18 months in, I wish I had thought to do this sooner. I mean, to your point, it's somewhat of a dream job to have this sort of opportunity. Parity approached me. I didn't know to look for this sort of job, if I'm honest. I was certainly aware of and excited about the rise in women's sports because even if you go back to sort of late 2022 when I kicked off conversations with Parity, the noises were already apparent. And of course, we've continued to go from strength to strength. I would say that throughout my corporate career, I've always tried to find organizations where I feel like I can do great work, but also have impact on some dimension. I've always looked for mission-driven organizations, for companies where, again, I feel like the product, the service, whatever the organization is doing is driving some form of good. I mean, I don't know, I'll use LinkedIn as an example. I worked there for 4.5 years, and this mission of connecting the world's professionals to make them more productive and successful, and a vision of providing economic opportunity for every member of the workforce, sort of thing. That's very inspiring. I mean, you can go and build a great business against that and drive lots of revenue, but you feel ultimately like you're questing for something that matters, something that improves people's lives. So again, throughout my career, I by and large was working for organizations that had that mission-driven sort of focus. As I was exiting my third CMO role, I felt like it would be amiss if I automatically rushed headlong into a fourth CMO role. And so I thought I would step back and figure out, well, what other skills have I amassed in my career? Where might I apply those? And I'm also, frankly, at that stage of life where I'm looking to do more good. I'm looking to create impact in the world. And I was just really fortunate that the exec search firm that was working with Parity to find the next CEO reached out to me at that exact moment. So I engaged in the conversation. And of course, as once you see the inequity in sport, it's very difficult to unsee it. And Parity and this search firm just presented me with layer upon layer of insight in just what is going on in women's sports. And to be honest, I hadn't really stopped to think about it, because even as a CMO at companies that had budget, I was being pitched all the time on sports activations and sports partnerships. And one company I had a partnership with the Golden State Warriors, another one we had a partnership with Tottenham Hotspur. We did some stuff at the USPGA. I can count on two fingers, I think, in 13 years in marketing, the number of times I was approached about an opportunity to do something in women's sports. We have to recognize how far we've come in the last even 2 years. So this really does feel like a moment, more than a moment. It's now a movement, of course. But just sort of reflecting on where I'd been, the importance of driving impact, and then this incredible opportunity falling in my lap. It was just too much to pass up.
It's so cool. It's like those happy accidents they happen for a reason. So we're excited and thrilled that you're there. What we really wanted to talk to you about, obviously, is this really interesting bit of research that came out. I kind of got tipped off to it before it was going to be released. We were excited that it came out. We gobbled it up, I would say, when I shared it to Hillary and Keely, but it's called Beyond the Game, Exposing the Economic Realities of Professional Women Athletes. And before we dive into the numbers, I would love to just understand the impetus and the inspiration at Parity to set out and conduct this specific piece of research.
Sure. We're at a moment in time where women's sports is very clearly on the rise. I think nobody would dispute that. Everyone's very excited about it. I think sometimes it's easy to look at the headlines and think that, everything is up and to the right. The problems are solved. Caitlin's got her, multi-million-dollar shoe deal. No issues. Let's move on. We know, of course, from working with what I lovingly describe as the next 99% of athletes, perhaps not Caitlin Clark, but actually some of Caitlin Clark's teammates, that most, if not, the vast, vast majority of athletes are not in the fortunate position of Caitlin, who deserves every penny, incidentally, that she's getting. So being close to the action, as it were, and understanding that, or having the hunch at least that the world doesn't know enough about the true economics of being a woman athlete, we thought we saw an opportunity basically to try and shed some light. We also recognized that the reason that this sort of research hasn't been run at any sort of scale before is it's quite difficult to get to a population of verified professional women athletes. And Parity sits in a unique position because we work across sports, as I said, 1,100 plus athletes, 80 sports. We felt we were in a strong position to reach out to our community and also through them to other trusted networks to know that we were reaching real athletes and to know also that they would trust us to give us real information. So we thought we had the opportunity and also almost the obligation to ask the right questions of athletes. What do they earn? What do they spend on their sport? How do those numbers, reconcile? Are they stressed about money? How are they, thinking about money for the future? What's the role of sponsorship? We had so many questions to just try and quantify some of the hunches that we had around the finances of women athletes. So we, we're out in field for a couple of months, and we came back with what we think is some pretty interesting data.
Yeah. And because we're uber nerds at Trail Society, we all come from a scientific research background. We've all spent time conducting and analyzing data. And so we've got to start with the methodology a little bit, as any good research team does. Broadly, and I know that Keely's not here with us, but actually Keely had some input on this too. Hillary has some like specific questions, I think, about like how those numbers play out a little bit because they were just intriguing. But can you tell us a little bit more broadly about the athletes that were surveyed, like sporting backgrounds, like country of location where they're competing, et cetera?
For sure. We gathered 500 responses from verified athletes who play a total of 55 different sports, I think the number was. We obviously didn't want to be too overweight in any one sport because you don't want this to be, a report on, you know, women rowers, for example. This really was designed to be something that was holistic. So we had sports that had higher representation, like soccer, track and field, basketball, etc. But there was no single sport that was over, I think it was 12% of respondents. And the breakdown in terms of team sports versus individual sports, because we work with a lot of Olympians and folks that compete in individual sports, we had about 60% team sports, 40% individual sports. And our entire population, we had about 6% of our respondents that are para athletes as well, or who play in adaptive sports. And there were 30 different countries that were covered. A large percentage is a United States, is their home country, about 73%. But there were a bunch of different countries that were included in that data as well. So it was quite a broad cross section of athletes from many different sports, different backgrounds, and therefore we hope it again gives this broadly representative picture of the economics of being a woman athlete today.
Right. I mean, I think that was something that really stood out to me when I dug into the actual, like the numbers of it, right? Because that really truly does matter. It matters if there's a variety of athletes that you're surveying and getting this information from. Because I know even from brand to brand within trail running, like different brands can allocate a different number of funds for their trail athletes versus, other types of athletes if they're, big brand involved in multiple sports.
Yeah. And we definitely had, we didn't divulge the numbers of any specific sport, but I know we had triathletes respond. We had, distance runners. We had, again, because we sit at this cross section of all sports, we're always trying to elevate the conversation across sports. So that again was important to us and also felt pretty unique to Parity.
Right. And then another follow-up question I had too, was, okay, so some of the caveats for survey research is you're subject to the results of the people who are willing to participate, right? So my question of these is, of these 500 verified athletes, what level of athlete were they? Like, I mean, i.e., are they like a Caitlin Clark level, or was it like a good variety of like all different types of athletes, right? Because if it's some, I mean, because you never know if it can be skewed one way or the other. And I'm not even sure if how you would gather that information, but that was something that stuck out to me.
Yeah, we promised when we gathered the information that we wouldn't divulge the identity of any
Of course.
individual athletes or whatever, but we do know for a fact. I mean, we have multi medal winning Olympians and Paralympians in the mix. We have NWSL players. We have WNBA players. Now we also have players for the USL Super League, which is the up and coming, the new league, Division I league that just launched in the US recently. We have athletes that play basketball overseas. So it's a mix, right? Again, when we hear about women athletes in the media, we typically hear the same 5 or 10 names. And our point is that the world of women's sports is so much more diverse and multifaceted. And, our job and our opportunity, I think, for brands as well, is to really get into those stories and understand that broader cross section of the population.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one thing too, like having competed in an Olympic sport that does not necessarily get a lot of press outside of every 4 years in the sport of biathlon. My roommates at the Olympic Training Center were bobsled, skeleton, and luge athletes. And they go into debt every Olympic cycle type of thing because they pay for everything. And if they win a medal, the money that they get from the US Olympic Committee might be enough to like net them zero at the end of it type of thing. So it's like they are competing at a national and international and global level, but like different sporting types have their own hurdles. So I did think it was kind of interesting that knowing Olympians and Paralympians on a wide range of level. The Olympians who are making the tennis team who are also playing in the tennis majors is a little bit different from like a endorsements and sponsorship standpoint than it is for, you know, the gals on the US skeleton team, for example. Okay, but I guess from there, so that we don't like just like spend time picking apart percentages, we'd love really to talk about the key, like the big key findings, because there were, and you guys did a great job. We will link the takeaway points and the link for where people can download the full report in our show notes. But we'd love to kind of dig into the big takeaways of the findings when it came to like athlete earnings, obviously what we're calling the second shift, financial stress, as you mentioned earlier, is mega critical, and then long-term planning, and then the promise of sponsorships, kind of understanding how in each of those categories there were like mega takeaways from the research.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to go through that. And thank you for linking to the research. I'll just say, time out, folks. Anyone can talk to me on LinkedIn. I'm very, very happy to connect with folks that want to go deeper on any of this, as would our team be. But if we take each of those sort of sets of findings, if you will. So first off, on athlete earnings, across our sample of, again, 500 athletes, we found that 58% made $25,000 or less from their sport. And by the way, all of these results were focused on their earnings in the year 2023. So we looked at that full calendar year and asked them to respond on that. So over half made $25,000 or less. 78% responded saying that they made less than $50,000, which is less than right around the US individual median income for that year. So number one is these athletes on average are not making a lot of money. And then when you ask them about what they spend, of course, to train, to compete, to travel, 50% basically said, you know what, when I look at my earnings from sport and what I spend to compete in my sport, I don't make any money. I don't make a cent from playing sport, which, when you sit back and think about, okay, but wait a second, aren't you training 20 or 30 hours a week? And if so, then what do you do to make money? So that sort of led into our second kind of area of exploration, which was around, as you said, the second shift. What we found is that 74% of the athletes that we talked to have a job outside of being a professional athlete. Fully 25% of them work full-time year-round, including when they're in season for their sport. Which, to us, again, it just sort of speaks to just the weight of expectation, I guess, and the weight of obligation on these athletes. And, as I said, we have WNBA, NWSL players who were part of this survey. I will say anecdotally, we've had a WNBA athlete who has worked either full-time or part-time for us for the last 3 years.
Wow.
And she had a starting spot on her team in 2024. This is the first season that she's cut back, in fact, to part-time. And she plays a season overseas. So this just gives you a snapshot into, even in the most elite sport, in one of the most followed sports in the world, athletes aren't making a lot of money from playing their sport, and they have to find ways to supplement it, which I thought was it's a depiction of reality. We have to acknowledge where we are in this journey in order to figure out what we do about it. So when you take into account that, okay, so you've got athletes not earning a ton from their sport, you've got athletes that are working a second shift typically in order to make ends meet. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, we then looked at sort of the financial stress that that they live under. And it's not just about what they do or don't earn, it's also about the inconsistency of earnings for athletes. So we asked about, how predictable are your earnings? And we have stats in the survey around like what percentage come from sponsorships versus salary and things that you or perhaps fall into a different bucket. And what we found is that, sponsorships and endorsements for athletes, 57% said that they're really not very predictable, which, as you can imagine, is a huge source of stress if you don't know if the money's coming in. Even salary and other types of non-sponsorship earnings, almost half said that those weren't terribly predictable. So you've got this unpredictability of when the money's coming in, how it's coming in. And then as a woman, of course, you've got that, well, there's the whole question around, am I going to be a parent at some point? Motherhood. We found huge uncertainty around, okay, will I be supported by my sponsors in my sport, by my team, by my association or whatever it is. And so a large percentage didn't seem to know the answer. In fact, just 9% said for sure they'd be supported by their sponsors if they had a baby. So that's
Yeah,
pretty.
most contracts don't, like we'll see in running, for example, and trail running included in this, like most of our contracts don't have like a pregnancy clause. Like a termination clause is a common termination clause is you need to compete within 6 months. And sometimes it's 6 to 12 months, but it's like there's no separate clause for pregnancy. And so it's like just any reason why you wouldn't be able to compete is oftentimes in that termination paperwork. And that's really scary for athletes. That is a huge uncertainty. And brands might say one thing, but contractually they're not obligated to do anything.
Right. And then, there are other sports, tennis being a great example, actually, where, women have lived in fear of losing their ranking points. And then if you don't have ranking points, then you don't qualify for tournaments and you have to play in a different way. And then that becomes incredibly expensive. So just the burden of the fact that it has to be a choice for athletes and something that they need to think about in a different way is, again, just another lens on, okay, what are some sources of stress here? So when you add up sort of like the financial uncertainty, the earnings, the questions around motherhood, and even healthcare is obviously a source of stress in this country, and you need hardly talk about that. Fully 93% of the athletes that we talked to reported feeling some level of stress about their finances. And this is actually the stat that got me. 64% said they sometimes or frequently consider getting out of professional sports because of money. And if you think about being put on this earth and blessed with the talent to be competing at the most elite levels nationally, internationally, and yet to have to think twice about whether you can actually do that because of money, to just, that to me was almost like the low point of the findings, that we've put women athletes in this situation.
Yeah, in comparison to their male counterparts, right? Where that isn't, I have not seen a survey on it, but I have to imagine that they feel a little less stressed when it comes to their financial futures.
Right. And I mean, we've had these conversations on Trail Society, but also just I think Corinne and I alone have had like these filled like 4-hour runs together talking about this kinds of things because, just even in the world of trail running, I mean, I know if I win a race or if I do really well, we're seeing more and more women place within the top 10, sometimes even on the podium spot of the overall race itself. And knowing that like these numbers, right? Like it's almost like it's proof that, if we're doing well and we're beating, people who like top 10, like men, but on a lot of times their contracts have been, worth more than a woman who's elite and like winning the race and beating them, which seems it's infuriating. But it's also good to, it's like the problem, where do we because we're all scientists, it's like how do we attack it? I think the first step is knowing these numbers and then trying to figure out, okay, like how can we improve this, how can we make it better? So I think it's amazing that you guys put money and resources into actually finding out these numbers, because it's always talked about there out in the ether, but it's nice to have this to look at concretely.
Yes, and I should pause and give credit to Gainbridge, our sister company, who actually underwrote this research with, no expectation other than helping to shed light on this important topic, Hillary. So I think you're right. First step is uncovering the data. I do want to kind of quickly get to I'm a glass half full person. So yes, we uncovered all of this data. We also found, athletes really feel like they don't have enough information to plan for the future, and they're going to have to figure out what's next after sport. But we also, I think the kind of the last chunk of this report looks at, okay, so what do we do about this? Like, what is the solution? Because, even when you look at the new kind of media rights deals for the bigger leagues and the more money flowing into the sport in the most lucrative sports in the country, that still takes a long time to trickle down. And fortunately, we were able to point to some research that we did earlier this year around women's sports fandom and just how much opportunity there is for brands who invest in women's sports. Because guess what? Professional women athletes are universally admired. 88% of people consider them to be societal role models. Consumers want and expect brands to be doing more. Over half of them think that brands aren't investing enough. And then when you get to okay, but what does it mean to align with a woman athlete? What we find is that women's sports fans are almost 3 times more likely to buy a product or a service recommended by a woman athlete than by any other kind of influencer. And when I say any other, I mean male athletes, I mean Kardashians, I mean, you name any other kind of influencer. Women athletes, again, because of the admiration, because people are really broadly supportive of what's going on in women's sports, have that influence over folks that follow women's sports in any shape or form. So, we see so much opportunity and reason for brands to be leaning in here. And when we ask the athletes, okay, well, what level of sponsorship or partnership would be meaningful to you? The good news for brands is it doesn't have to cost the earth. And I think this is the piece that eluded me when I was in marketing, when I was approached with sports marketing opportunities. They were all high six, seven figures, eight figures, even in the case of F1 sometimes. But 88% of the athletes we talked to said that $20,000 a year from a sponsor would be either very meaningful or life-changing. And so as a brand, you have this golden opportunity to do really well for your brand, to get noticed in positive ways by women's sports fans, and to make a concrete difference in the life of the athletes that you're working with.
Yeah, one thing that was kind of also in that I really, really liked was the report you guys put together. One of the last points of it when it talked about like credibility of female athletes was that, and actually we'll talk a little bit too about the collective also put out a research piece that looked at this from the league perspective that was super interesting, but essentially that what was it? Women are the most credible brand ambassadors. Again, you mentioned that across men, across the Kardashians, et cetera, and they deliver like an additional 7% of believability. They call it the believability boost. I think that's really cool. It's like there's concrete information that like there is this clear uptick in like the fans like pay attention to what brands are sponsoring the women, are more likely to buy those brands and like believe the female athlete so much more than any other possible media asset, brand partnership, etc. And that to me was just like, yes, like this is the like it's not just good business, it's not just good business, it's good for business. And that's a sell that we have to, I think, really push right now for women's sports.
Yeah, most definitely. And incidentally, when we have, again, if anybody wants to talk at length about this, I'll more than happy to. But those stats are even rosier when you look at younger generations, which I know, a lot of brands are really kind of like struggling with how do I connect with Gen Z? And it turns out that they are really paying attention to women's sports and women athletes and following along and invested in their success. So yeah, tons of opportunity.
Mm.
And then one thing I was reflecting on, and I think Hillary and I have had a lot of conversations about this, was that I'm just like curious if you know from the data when you talk about like sponsorship versus salary versus endorsements, like in sport of trail and ultra running, for example, which is where the three of us sit on the podcast. We're all professional trail and ultra athletes. There's almost no prize money in trail running. Like Western States, one of the biggest 100-mile races in the world, zero prize money. You win a belt buckle and like a giant cougar statue and notoriety and whatever. But there's no prize money. There's a bonus associated from your brand. So all like how we get paid is we get an annual retainer. And then we have a bonus structure. Some brands have a pretty guaranteed bonus structure because there's flexibility in it. Some of it's like, these are the races we give bonus money for. You perform there, you get a bunch of money. We don't really care about any other race. So it's kind of this like combo thing, but we're not getting prize money as a sense of like a source of earnings. And so would a retainer in that regard, like when it comes to this research, fall into like the salary bucket versus like a sponsorship and endorsement bucket? Just trying to understand the differences. And like I read the research and without knowing that information, I was like, wow, maybe we're doing okay in trail and ultra running, despite the fact that we don't feel like we're getting paid very much.
Yeah, so I think a retainer would fall into the salary and kind of like non-sponsorship bucket. So I mean, in a similar vein, like the USATF pays athletes a stipend every year that are in their program. So I think that's different from working with a brand, having a partner that basically has a paid relationship with you to be an ambassador to support the brand or to be in campaigns or whatever it is.
Yeah. Or we
And I
just
think
lump it all into one bucket, maybe in trail and ultra running. And so we're missing maybe we're missing a key endorsement capability because our salary is so tied up with that like a singular brand's endorsement, essentially.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe yours is a hybrid one. I mean, it does sound a little bit different from the a lot of the other sports that we that we surveyed in. I mean, I will say like prize money or earnings from salary and things like that are relatively low, I think, across women's sports. I mean, you even heard, I don't know if you saw Luna Mars, one of her many, many social clips, but she was being interviewed for the Bristol Bears the other day. And her
Yes.
point was, look, I'm never going to make 100,000, I'm never going to make six figures from rugby. I have to be active off the pitch because that's how I'm going to make money.
Yeah. And she's
It's true
phenomenal.
for Lona, it's true for everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Truly. And it feels even more so for women's sports. I've always said that men just had to be good, but women had to be like pretty and good. And I always found that very frustrating because you see that with endorsement dollars, right? Is that like there is this like, I don't want to call it speed eyes. That seems maybe inappropriate, but it's like men, as long as they're good at their sport, it's like the money follows. And I feel like for women, there is this additional qualifier of like you can be the best in your sport, but if you don't have this special factor, this it factor, the popular beauty, whatever it is, like that's a big hang up, right? Because if it's not your salary, if it's not your prize winnings, if it's coming from specific endorsements and you're not, the advertisement darling, that like that's a big loss for women. And I just don't think men um have to which one is the Kelsey brother that just retired?
Jason.
Like he's like, I don't know, he kind of looks like a caveman, right? Like no, like he is hilarious. I love his whole family, but like he just had to be a good football player. Like it's a bonus that he's a personality, but it's like that's not what he got paid for. He didn't get paid for a personality. He got paid at least initially because he was a good football player. And so it's just like women have this like one additional thing that like feels nebulous and almost like it's not tangible, I guess, from an earnings perspective.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's something that troubles us. And when we're going back to brands with potential, sort of like portfolios of athletes for them to consider, we do always try and be as diverse as possible in the different athletes that we're bringing forth. We want to try and secure opportunities for as many as possible. We also encourage brands to really lock in on the story because what ultimately any good marketer is looking for is an authentic story. What's that authentic connection to your brand? Are they product users? Are they fully aligned with the causes that we support and or our values? And from there, it shouldn't matter what they look like or anything. Like it was really about, can you find that human being who's got that incredible, sort of like tie-in with your brand, in which case all good things will follow. The content will be amazing. It'll be believable. Their followers will really lean in, etc.
Yeah, I've been calling it impact advertisement, where it's like it's not just an ad. There's a story there. There's a reason that that partnership has been made, and it's not just like here, look at this shoe. It's like here is this person, here is their story. Look, they happen to be in a shoe type of thing, and that feels. I'm way more into watching that 90-second commercial than I am in watching just like a generic running commercial, for example. Trick me into watching your commercial by telling me the story, I guess is kind of where I'm going with this.
Well, I mean, that's always, yeah, like the storytelling has always been, I think, marketing and very successful. I mean, as much as Nike doesn't get there's some negative press around it, they're the ones I think that use that quite well for a lot of their athletes to get like that brand, I think it's brand loyalty, right? So we
Yeah.
just have to use women more for that because we already have brand loyalty apparently.
We wax poetically about it. One thing that I want to bring up that you mentioned, that I mentioned, that we've been kind of like going in a circle about a little bit was this other piece of research that came out from the collective. And it's gotten a lot of press as well, because it was very positive, I would say, overwhelmingly positive when it came to investors in and prospective investors in women's professional sporting leagues, specifically the National Soccer League, the WNBA, and the new PWL. I want to call it the PHL.
PWHL.
Yeah, there we go. And just kind of like it looks good. And like we're looking at like increase through 2027, like league, like some league expansion, but not crazy. But it was like positive, positive, positive. And you mentioned like leagues are doing well and there's more investment dollars there than ever. And they also mentioned all this like why should people be investing in women's sports when it came to like just like validating using women as like really good marketing partners. But as you mentioned, the leagues might be doing well, but it does not seem that that's like necessarily trickling down to the athletes in the league. And I'm curious if that's league dependent, if it's super disconnected, if we as a public just don't understand that. Because I'm like, hoorah, rah, women's sports are doing great. But based on your survey, there are probably many women that are key players within those leagues who are not doing great in comparison to like the quote unquote stars of that league series?
Yeah, so first, loved seeing that report come out. Big fans of any and all research that sheds light on what's going on in women's sports, and there is a lot to be optimistic about. I don't disagree with some of the major takeaways. As is often the case in some of these bigger reports, it does focus on a narrow group of sports, and the NWSL and the WNBA are far and away the most followed women's leagues in the US. And PWHL has had an incredible first season. I mean, I'm very excited to see hockey kind of on the up and up. We have actually quite a lot of hockey players in our network, and this is a breath of fresh air for them to have this sort of playing opportunity.
Well, they've only ever had the Olympics, right? It's
Yeah, I mean,
always
there have
been
been
more
various
or
leagues
less.
sort of tried to get off the ground, but this is a really concerted effort that's done incredibly well in its first season, and I love that they're doing a touring schedule for their second season. So these leagues are doing a fantastic job. There's lots of excitement around them, and there's definitely upside. Um, I would say that these are among the most prominent, well-capitalized leagues in the world. When we ask the athletes, and this is part of the report actually, we asked how hopeful they are about the future. You see more nuanced responses, right? There are athletes who are, again, as I said, we definitely have athletes from these major leagues who were part of the response set. And some of them are perhaps more bullish if they are in this kind of subset of sports. If they are in the roster, but maybe not playing full time, that distances them a bit further from the economic opportunity. If they're in a different sport, if they're in a different team sport altogether that has a new league up and coming, that's different. If they're in an individual sport, it's hard for them to see how that's going to filter to kind of their realm. So it's sort of like I don't think we've found the panacea across all sports. Even if the money is now starting to flow with a bit more predictability and sort of abundance into some of the top leagues. So it's great news overall for women's sports. Very exciting. We want to see these leagues continue to gain momentum, gain eyeballs, just build be part of building the ongoing case and proof points for women's sports. But there's so much more beyond those leagues, and also even within the leagues, the players themselves. There's a broad spectrum. Like not, Alex Morgan, when she retired, I think was earning 8 million a year. I can tell you that, an average NWSL player not earning close to that sort of thing. So just again, there's just a lot of shades of opportunity, I'd say, within women's sports.
And maybe this is speculative and we don't have to have the answers obviously today by any means, but I know that the like bargaining agreements are very different between like the men's leagues and the women's leagues, but it seems like some of these newer bargaining agreements, particularly the one in the Women's National Soccer League, seems to be like very, very progressive. Do you think that kind of bargaining power amongst the players is going to boost that? I just know that like they really haven't had time off. They like their salaries, like there's like salary caps or not salary caps. Like, how do you think that those kind of collective bargaining agreements could particularly like change that landscape for these league-based team sports?
Yeah, I think they're important, and I do. It's sort of like, again, going back to my original story around discovering parity and what's going on in women's sports. Once you see the problem, you can't unsee it. So I think at this point, lots has been said and lots has been, right, again, all credit to Caitlin Clark. When people found out she was only making $75,000 a year, they're like, what the actual, is that real? And then suddenly everybody's like, oh, okay, women athletes, even if they are, time athlete of the year, aren't making a lot from playing their sport. So I do think that this problem is now risen into the international consciousness. That does give a bit more bargaining power and put a bit more, I think, urgency and I guess momentum into the fight, as it were. But also the virtuous cycle that is spinning. I mean, a lot of this is tied into media rights and eyeballs, and those have been again trending more and more encouraging, and again more and more opportunity, if you will, for the athletes to get known, for people to follow the sports, for advertisers to get involved in all of that. So I do think, there is a virtuous cycle happening again within these main sports in particular. And I do believe that the collective bargaining agreements are going to be very important in the years to come.
Yeah, here's to hoping. Anyway, Hillary, I'm wondering if you have any, I've got kind of one closing question, but I'm wondering if you have anything else that you want to touch on.
No, I'm just very grateful that you're a glass half full kind of person, because a lot of times I see these things and I get discouraged. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been feeling this way. And it's great to see the numbers, but then sometimes I'm at a loss of like turning my anger or frustration into action. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, there's so much to do. That's
Yeah.
my sort of reflection on this year, my first 18 months at Parity really is what an exciting time, what a time to be alive. So much more
Right.
women's sports is visible.
Hmm.
What a set of opportunities for athletes in the coming years, but how much there is to do. And
Right.
for our part, I think at Parity, we're going to continue probably to be the slightly annoying realists that will present this side of the story while also talking about how much opportunity there is. Because again, we just see so much opportunity. We celebrate the achievements of the athletes themselves, the financial progress and the milestones that we're seeing week in, week out. We would be remiss if we didn't also raise the very real situation that athletes find themselves in, because I think it's just one more reason that brands should feel really good about leaning into women's sports in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah. I guess my follow-up question is kind of speaking back again to our audience, and just kind of the wider athlete audience in general, is that, is there a piece of advice that you would like to leave with them? And maybe it's to a young trail athlete, or even something that you wished you knew sooner, but like specifically to that young athlete, what is something that they can think about now, start working on now, that you've seen through the research or seen through your work over the last 18 months or seen it in the brand work that you've done before that even? What should they be doing now or thinking about now?
Well, I think two things. Hopefully, a word of encouragement. Number one, there is a real community around women's sports, and you can experience it within your sport. If you're good enough to be a professional women athlete, we welcome you with open arms. We are open to all pro women athletes competing in sort of elite levels across any sport. And my hope is that within Parity, you will find a community of kindred spirits. We're actually launching an app soon where you'll be able to talk to other athletes and get advice and share tips and all of that. So there's more coming to help you in your in your individual quest as an athlete. But the other thing is, I mean, this is like a real snapshot of what it's like out there. And the thing that we knew going into this and that we continue to know to be true is these athletes are incredibly talented on multiple facets. They are multi-hyphenate because they have to be. They compete, but they also put time into thinking about how can they make money, and make sure income is coming off the court, off the field, off the track, so that they can continue to do what they love. So, I think it's you may not have you may not love doing social media or love creating content or love public speaking, but there are plenty of opportunities for athletes to supplement their income by working with brands. And it's really just a question of finding the brands where there's that connection that makes sense all around. And, again, we're here to help with that.
I love it. So I guess when you're here to help with that, where can people find you, find Parity? How can they get a hold of you? And or if they are a female athlete that's qualified to be part of Parity, how can they get in touch with the organization?
Of course, our website is paritynow.co. So not .com, paritynow.co. There, if you look at the in the nav, there's a section for athletes and there's a simple onboarding form there. There's also a section for brands if you want to chat about any of the data or anything else, then obviously right there is a good place to do it. I am quite active on LinkedIn, happy to respond to folks that reach out there too.
I love it. We send everyone to our own DMs. So exactly, we'll send everyone to LinkedIn. This is great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, thanks for the conversation. And here's to another great year in women's sports.
Well, I learned a lot from that, and I'm both fired up in a positive way, and I'm fired up to get to work when it comes to finding some equity for women's professional sports. So a big thanks to Leila for coming on today. We will be keeping a close eye on Parity and what they are up to. But to close things out today, we got to do a little society slam because you guys keep sliding into our DMs. You guys are creating Instagram accounts to slide into our DMs. Before we do that, one more quick shout out to our title sponsor over at the feed. Thank you for giving us snacks. Thank you for filling our pantries. Thank you for filling our center consoles and our lockers at school and the water bottles that Hillary is drinking out of in this audio form podcast. But again, go over to www.thefeed.com/Trail Society and claim those credits. Okay, who wants to slam first? What's going on?
I'll do one. So I know we did our Ask Us Anything episode, but it's never too late, and we'll still do some more analysis later. But someone asked, I'm super curious what your relationships are like with Strava. Toxic, motivating, some combination. We've also done some like earlier episodes, like when we first came out. So if you ever care to refresh, you can always go back to the very beginning. I think our organizational skills are a lot better now. But yeah, no, yeah. I don't know. I'm only like a 7-year Strava user. I didn't always use it.
Only a 7-year Strava user.
Has it
Yeah,
been
but like,
around longer than 7 years?
I
My
think
longest
so.
relationship.
My longest relationship, yeah, I know. But the other one is, I don't know. I think, yeah, honestly, it's normally really motivating, but lately, like, I think this summer I had some trouble with it. Like, I needed to like just have it be for me and my coach and like just me and myself. So sometimes I feel the need to like hide in my little bubble, but most of the time I think it should be very motivating. But sometimes I think when I'm having a lot of trouble, I don't want everyone like knowing what I'm doing. Maybe it's just like, I don't know, some weird like mental thing that I go through, but
I
I
think
don't
that's
know.
normal. I think that's normal. I think
Yeah.
we all have like chapters of good Strava time and chapters of dark Strava time, literally like going Strava dark. My husband jokes that he can only have one social media form at a time. And so he'll like be off Instagram, but then he's on Strava, which means he'll like actually update his titles and that kind of thing. And you can see his 1.4 mile run to work and back. Um, but yeah, I think there are times where I really love it and I love kind of like the social, like literally the social media component of it. Like I can see what my friends have done and like give them kudos and say like little things on their runs. But there are definitely times where it's like I can feel the comparison trap. I can feel the thief of joy sneaking in. And it is worse for me the closer I get to races where I'm like zeroing in on what the other people have been doing. And I don't like that. And I definitely don't recommend doing that. And talking athletes like Hannah Allgood and Jeff Mogavero. Before Javelina, they both actually kind of went like unintentionally Strava dark, in which they were like, you know what, for their own like well-being and health and sanity, they're like, I need to not look at this for the next month. So it's like maybe their runs were uploading, but they weren't like on Strava doing the check-ins. So I think that there's like a good mix there to be had.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, okay. That's like we're kind of waffling on it, but I think all that to say is that there's a evolving relationship when it comes to Strava, and that is a-okay. Okay. I'm gonna do this next one. It says, "Hey, I'm wondering if you've heard of any benefits of runners taking creatine. The stigma of being a gym bro thing kind of intimidates me, but I've heard a few runners taking creatine to try to improve their performance. Thanks so much." We should probably do some like nutritional deep dives in an upcoming episode, maybe in early 2025. I think creatine's kind of a mixed bag for folks. I've heard it's really beneficial, particularly for people who have a hard time staying hydrated. Maybe they live in a dry environment or a higher altitude environment, and they've found benefits from that. But you definitely have and in part because you get water retention. And so I've had friends who have actually used creatine supplementation because of that. But there is a water retention component. And so a lot of people don't like it because they feel that water retention. But I haven't done my due diligence ahead of the show to actually dive into creatine more than that, unfortunately. But you're not a gym bro. It could be relevant, and I think we should actually like have a conversation about it in an upcoming episode.
I agree. There's some preliminary data that I've been told about. I haven't looked into this either, but that it is safe for women and for female athletes. And so I think, yeah, it definitely requires a little deep dive on our end. So maybe we'll throw it into the next episode's intro and do a little deep dive for you guys. But I'm leaning towards the creatine is okay for women camp.
Sick.
Same, sweet.
Wait, I love this next one too.
You can say the next one too.
Okay, so someone wrote in and they just said, I'm voting for Carbivore as the name of the Trail Society carbohydrate cult. I think we can
Which
all
is
be
super fitting from like what we just talked about. Carbs are very
carbivores.
important.
We are carbivores around here for sure. I love that. We're gonna trademark that. Hold
That's
fast.
good. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna cut this, but I'm trying to find the episode where we talked about DNFs.
It was recent.
I
You're
know.
muted, Hillary.
Sorry, yeah, that was one. I didn't know if we wanted to even do this slam. I just put it in
I think
there,
we should
but
just call it out.
Okay.
Yeah,
we just did recently around UTMB.
Was it 80 racing for longevity? DNF 83. Okay, cool. I'll do this one. I think the next one was the person with no Instagram account. It's kind of lengthy. They want kind of like just like backgrounds on us. So I think we should throw it into an intro. That could be pretty fun.
They sent me this message too. I think our final episode of the year can have a bit of casualness
like
to it.
Too. Yeah.
And it can be a re-intro to us because I responded to this person with like a bunch of little like behind the scenes of our nonsense.
Oh my gosh, cool.
But yeah, we can do like highlights from the year, etc. on our last episode. But I think like doing some of this stuff, some personal Q&As because we haven't done that in a long, maybe ever.
I think reintroducing things too. Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
That'd be great.
All right, so I'll just do this little one and then I'll say it's episode 83.
Cool.
So the last one is, how do you come back from a DNF? I'm trying to rationalize and write down learnings. I know that I'm not defined by my running performance. However, it hurts and I do feel like I've let people and myself down. So first of all, you've not let anybody else down. Everybody loves you. Nobody really even knows what we do. They're going to probably think you were supposed to run 26 miles. So the fact that you didn't finish, they won't even know. And they only want you to be happy. And so I think trying to remind yourself of that is really important because I've been there before. We've all been there before where we feel like we let people down. And it ends up being that they just really like you as a person and that they don't really care. But we talked about this in episode 83. So if you want to scroll back to our episode came out in September, take a listen to that and then let us know your thoughts and see if that episode helped you at all. But just remember, you are much more than a race and all of your friends love you regardless if you finish the race or not. And slowly over time, hopefully you'll be able to love yourself too, because in the grand scheme of the world, these are small potatoes and we love potatoes.
In fact, we love potatoes. And so if you are a part of our little potato carnivore cult, we'll love you extra big. But no, it's one of those things where it's really, really easy to like think that your self-worth is defined by your results. We've all been there. We've all struggled with it. We've talked about it here on this podcast together a lot. We know exactly where you are. But yeah, episode 83 is a good one. So go and listen to us kind of wade through the deep end together there. Well, that was not too somber. Okay. I'm sorry. It is somber, but what you should do is you're running right now. I know you're running right now because you're deep into this podcast. You're like 90 plus minutes deep. You've been motivated. You've been fired up. You've been angry. You've yelled at the trees around you about something we said or something you heard us say or something our guest said today. And that is okay. We appreciate you yelling at the trees. If you want to yell at us directly, you can slide into our DMs. We will take all of that there as well. And you should probably just snack right now if you're out on the run or if you're in your car, another snack time. I'm going to stop rambling and we will see you next time out on the trails.